Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. This one is all about relationships, communication in relationships, desire, sex in relationships. As you know, as a psychologist and a sexologist, working at that intersection of mental health, relationships, and sex is really my sweet spot. That's where I love to be. So I'm really excited to kind of bring that together for this webinar and particularly wanting to talk about all things relationships. So I had intended to really use this to talk about some really practical stuff around cultivating safety and trust in a relationship, having great communication around, particularly around sex in relationships, and also talking a little bit about desire in relationships, because I know issues of desire um, are really common. They're really prevalent for people. And as you would have seen, perhaps if you are in my close friends on Instagram, I put up some question boxes in the last few weeks, and I did actually get a couple of questions. So I'm going to answer them today as well. If you get the chance to watch this back, I would love to know what you think. Or if you have any questions, if you want any extra resources, reach out. I really designed my Unbound membership to be very interactive. I wanted to give people access to me and to really high quality content. That was really at the forefront of my mind when I designed Unbound, was how do I give people access to really high quality content about all things sex, relationships, and mental health, particularly when therapy, one-on-one therapy, is not accessible or suitable to everyone. So that was really how I designed Unbound. And I mean that with my whole heart, that I wanted to give people access to me and to really great quality content outside of the therapy space. So uh, that is our plan for today. So we might get into it. I've got a couple of notes here that I've made, so I'm just going to refer to them as well. But I thought a really nice place to start would be around communication. So I think this is anecdotally something that we've all understood is really important in relationships. I think we would all agree communication is key. And when I ask people about what's key to a great connection with a partner, particularly sexual connection, I hear over and over again that communication is really important. But I feel very strongly about this, and it is work that I do in my clinic every single day. Communication is a skill, and I actually think that is a hopeful message because, like any skill, it means it can be learnt and developed. Communication skills can be built upon. No one is born good at communicating. We learn how to communicate. And I think communication is one of those skills that excitingly can be developed over the course of our lifetime. Now, communication in a relationship, in an intimate relationship, is really key to the success of that relationship. But there are a couple of components of communication in an intimate relationship that are particularly important here and important to cultivate. One of those is vulnerability. Nothing can happen in terms of intimacy and growth and connection without some vulnerability. Vulnerability is hard for people. It's been hard for me. I have some pretty kind of avoidant traits, and what that has meant for me is a tendency to want to flee, to escape, to step away when things feel vulnerable or emotional, and doing the work to stay with whatever's happening in the moment, stay with my emotions or a difficult topic, or my partner's emotions. Doing that work is ongoing. I've come to accept that that work for me will probably be lifelong, in that this won't ever come super easily. It will come more easily, and it does come more easily than it used to, but it is still intentional work to stay with those hard moments, to regulate myself in those hard moments. So there are a couple of things that I want to mention here around strategies for doing this. And this is going to lead into me to talk specifically about sexual communication, but I just want to stay with this concept of kind of vulnerability and staying with an emotional conversation or an emotional situation. There are a couple of key strategies I like to give people to do that, practical skills. The first is nothing can happen, nothing good will happen if we are flooded. Flooded is a state of nervous system overwhelm, like physiological overwhelm. For me, flooding looks like hot, that feeling here of like I might cry, right? That kind of on the edge of crying. It also looks like a physiological sensation of kind of panic in my body. So you know that feeling in your chest and in your stomach. Flooding will look and feel differently for you, but you will definitely have your warning signs that you are becoming overwhelmed and flooded. And it is key. It is a number one fundamental rule of communication that we stop if one or both of us are flooded. So that is my first tip to you is learn to notice the signs that you are becoming flooded and maybe even start to learn those about a partner if you're in a long-term relationships. If you're in a long-term relationship, what are their signs that they're becoming flooded? And develop a shorthand language between the two of you to go, I want to continue this conversation, but I am overwhelmed. I am flooded. I need to go and take a moment. When this happens, it is key that we have some tools in our toolkit to go and take a break and down regulate our nervous system. Down regulation strategies are strategies that will turn off that flooding hyper aroused response, kind of bring that down a little. So that might look like things like going for a walk, having a shower, doing some deep breathing. It is not taking a break to stew about the fight or the conversation you're having and to think of ways to come back and win or defeat your partner or tell your partner what you think of them. It is a proper break from the situation at hand with an agreement of like a time frame. I will be back. I will take this break to go for a walk or have a shower or do some breathing exercises or stretching. Stretching is another good one. And I will be back in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. I'll be back and we can continue. But it is a firm agreement that nothing good happens when we are flooded. So that is my first strategy for staying with emotion or vulnerability. My second strategy is to lead with curiosity. So if we feel ourselves reverting to what I call safety seeking behaviors. Safety seeking behaviors are those things we do to defend ourselves when we feel under threat, whether that's our partner's raising a grievance or the topic is emotional or difficult. Very important to notice what are the things I do to seek safety, which might be things like defensiveness, blaming, criticizing, shutting down, stonewalling, yelling, whatever it is. Notice those things I do to seek safety and switch to instead curiosity and connection. If I am leading with curiosity and connection, and I'm going to talk about what that actually is in a minute, if I'm leading with those things, I can't guarantee much to you, but I can say with a lot of confidence that you will significantly increase the odds of this conversation going well. Whatever conversation you're having with your partner, if you are leading with curiosity and connection, there's a fair chance it will go well. Curiosity and connection, I want to talk about in detail and give you some really practical examples of what they might mean. So if I'm in a conversation with my partner that is emotional or heightened or just, fraught, nervous, tense in some way, uh, leading with connection is usually done through verbal and non-verbal validation and positive interaction. Validation is not agreement. I think sometimes there is some resistance to validation because we imagine it's going to mean I'm agreeing with my partner or I'm saying that, like, like, yeah, I feel the same way as you, when in fact your partner might be saying something that you definitely do not agree with, right? Validation is about acknowledging that they have their experience and feelings and perspectives and that they are valid, right? It's not saying they're right or that you agree with them. It's just saying that they're valid here, just like yours are. Like mine and yours are valid. So validation looks like, in practice, looks like saying to our partner something along the lines of, thank you for telling me that. I can see that was hard for you. Thank you for sharing it. Now that you've said that, kind of helps me understand you a little better. It actually makes sense to me why you got mad at me, why you're upset. I can see why you got upset now that I understand. Some examples of this might be like, let's imagine we don't communicate with our partner that we're coming home late. And we have a really valid reason for that, right? We have a whole valid reason about why, we were on the phone from the second we left the office. There wasn't a minute to let our partner know we were going to be late. We went from meeting to meeting. So from our perspective, we have a valid reason for not having let our partner know we were going to be late. But what is also valid is that that impacted our partner. They didn't know what to do about dinner. They made dinner and the timing was off. They had to throw out food that they'd made for us, whatever it is. So their experience of that being frustrating and annoying, that's valid, right? Just like it's valid that we didn't do it. So it's not about right or wrong. It's just that both of those experiences existed. A really lovely question here could be, what was happening for you? So during this interaction, what was happening for you? And that's how we can introduce curiosity, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But it also leads us across the bridge to validation. You know what? I have all my reasons for not calling you, letting you know I was going to be late. But also, I really understand now that you've explained what this was like for you, the sitting at home, the waiting, the not knowing. I would be annoyed too. Like, I can understand why you were annoyed. So that's validation. I want to actually share a story here, if I can, of a time when I received some really lovely validation. I was approaching my partner to share with him some feelings and thoughts I was having about a difficult situation we were facing. And I was very anxious to do this. As I mentioned earlier, I have some avoidant tendencies, which means that I can think of a million things I would rather do than bring to him a concern or a worry or something that I don't think he's going to like hearing. So I was very anxious. My default would have been to not raise that, but I'm really trying to build more secure attachment. So I made the decision to bring it to him, but I was very agitated. I was in an anxious state bringing it to him. So I brought it to him and he said, thank you for telling me. I can see that was really hard for me. I can see that was really hard for you, rather. He could see it was hard for me. Thank you for telling me. I can see that was really hard for you. And as you can see, it's making me a bit emotional just to share that with you. That story, that was months ago, but it continues to make me emotional because I remember vividly the feeling that went through my body when he said that. The enormous relief. It took all the heat out the situation for me. It made the rest of that conversation so much easier, even though the thing I was saying to him was something that was hard for him to hear. It was still a hard conversation, but there wasn't defensiveness or yelling or arguing or blaming or criticism, all of those defensive behaviors I mentioned before. There wasn't any of that. It was just discussion because he had done that beautiful job right at the start of just saying, this is okay for you to say. And it's such safety. We'll talk about safety shortly. So that's a lovely example of validation. Now, curiosity alongside this is really key. Curiosity is actually a form of validation too, because we're kind of saying your perspective matters. Tell me more about that. Curiosity is lovely, though, for a couple of other reasons. One, I am of the view that it is a lost art in long-term relationships. At the start of a relationship, we do curiosity really well. Getting to know someone, we want to know everything about them. Every rock we turn over, we learn something new. But very quickly into a relationship, we can, if we're not careful, if we get complacent, we can lose curiosity. And you hear this. I'm sure you found yourself saying to your partner, like, oh, yeah, you've told me this already. Like, you've told me this before. Or making assumptions, thinking we know our partner so well. So we make some assumptions about how they're going to react or what they want. But no one is fully knowable. And curiosity is aliveness. It's aliveness. It's fun, it's sexy, it's exciting to discover new things about ourselves and our partner and our relationship. Like, we are doing ourselves a disservice if we let go of curiosity. Now, when it comes to vulnerability, it's a really lovely way to role model it and to elicit more of it and to show your partner, like, this is safe to talk to me. I care about your perspective. I want to know. So you can, as I'm saying that, you can probably see how curiosity is a form of validation. Curious questions must be delivered with warmth and genuineness. An example of a non-curious question would be, what the hell do you mean by that? That is not a curious question, right? Curiosity is warm, it is genuine, it is, oh, I didn't I didn't know that. Tell me more. Or, well, now that you've shared what was triggered for you, then, like, that makes total sense to me. I'd love to know more about when else this has shown up for you, or where did this start for you, or what's that like for you? Now that I'm now that I'm thinking about how frustrating this was for you to be at home waiting for me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry is another lovely validation, by the way. I'm sorry. And even though it's hard for me to hear, I want to know more about that, what that was like for you, because I don't want to do that to you. Tell me more. So curiosity is a lovely way to validate. It also has another little sort of nifty benefit to it. It's very regulating because it just buys you some time to compose yourself. If I am in a conversation with a with anyone really that is becoming heightened for me, I can feel that nervous system stuff starting to rise in my body. I will ask a question, a genuine question that I genuinely care about, but I will use the time that they are answering while I'm also listening to downregulate, to take some breaths, to soothe myself, uh, to breathe, to ground, just to give myself that minute to stay with this conversation and resist the flooding that might be starting to happen in my body. So that is curiosity and validation. A couple of other kind of simple practical tools for great communication, using I statements, classic structure to sentences that you've probably heard over and over again. We hear this advice repeated because it works. I statements, I feel about the situation, not about the other person. So in my example before, annoyed with your partner because they didn't tell you they were coming home late from work. The way that we would not do this is, I feel annoyed that you're selfish. I feel annoyed that you're an asshole who doesn't consider me. That's not what we're doing here. I feel annoyed that we didn't communicate or that I didn't hear from you. And this impacted me in XYZ. And then the rest of that sentence, positive need, state positive need. I feel frustrated that I didn't hear from you. That impacted me because I was disrupted in our dinner plans. And what I'd really like from you going forward is just to communicate if you're going to be home after 6 p.m. Right? That's all. And you can do it, a quick message. Don't worry, you don't have to be polite about it. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be a phone call, just a quick message. My ETA is 7 p.m. Okay. All right. So I feel X about the situation. Here's how it impacted me, and here's my positive need. That is a beautiful model for communicating needs in a relationship, particularly if something's happened that we're frustrated about. Now, I mentioned this word safety before. when it comes to emotional safety, what we're referring to there is, am I okay to raise things with my partner, even if they are hard, painful, hurtful, scary? Is it allowed? And we get the sense of whether this is allowed in a number of different ways. I mentioned earlier this concept of positive interactions. Emotional conversations need to have a high rate of positive interactions. Positive interactions are the verbal and non-verbal cues that we send to each other that says, we're still okay. We're still connected. We're still us. Now, John and Julie Gottman, who are the godmother and godfather of all things relationship research, they have been researching relationships and communication for decades. And they propose that in conflict, in a romantic relationship, in conflict, the conversation or the conflict, excuse me, needs to have a ratio of 5 positive interactions to 1 negative, right? So I think that sounds pretty shocking to a lot of people that if I'm in conflict with my partner, I have to have 5 positive interactions for every negative, right? So a negative interaction might be something like I revert to those behaviors I mentioned before. I yell or I interrupt or I criticize or I blame or I'm contemptuous or I'm sarcastic, right? They're negative interactions. Positive interactions can be things like the stuff we've talked about already. I'm sorry, validation, curiosity. That makes sense to me. Yeah, I kind of get it. It can also be nonverbal, nodding, making affirming noises. Yeah, I'm listening. It can also be touch. In fact, I know a couple who make a point of holding hands when they have conflict, which I don't know about you, that to me sounds intense, but I get it. Like, I get it as an approach. It's a way of maintaining connection. So, all of these positive interactions we have in a heightened conversation, just those little moments of like, you know what, yeah, good point. Like, that is a fair point what you just said, or like whatever, those kinds of positive interactions, they are really key to cultivating safety because they consistently reinforce like your position is valid and you're okay here. Like even if we're annoyed at each other, like we're okay and we're still a team. That example I gave before of my partner saying, thank you for sharing this. I can see that's very hard for me. You can imagine what that does for my nervous system in assessing, is this a safe person? Like clearly that was a huge deposit into my emotional bank account of this is a safe person for me to come to with hard stuff. So, cultivating safety in a relationship is like that bank account in that we make deposits and unfortunately, probably withdrawals all the time. All the time. All these little ways that we send messages to our partner that say, you matter and you're safe to come to me or not. Now, if you're honest with yourself, you can probably think of some times when you did not send a message that you were a safe person to come to. I can think of times where I didn't respond that positively. Maybe I was disinterested, distracted, tired, snappy, whatever it was. No one gets this right all the time. And that's why I think that 5 to 1 is a really nice ratio to keep in mind. It's a pretty lofty goal, but 5 to 1, most of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, can I respond to my partner in a way that cultivates safety? So, taking everything we've talked about here, uh, curiosity, validation, flooding, staying regulated, cultivating safety, all of these things, you can pretty much turn the volume up in terms of how important they are when it comes to talking about sex. Sex is such a fraught topic for people. It is anxiety inducing, it is risky. We risk hurt, judgment, rejection, embarrassment. We risk exposing a problem. Like if I have a sexual desire that my partner does not want to fulfill, what does that mean for us if we're in a monogamous relationship? So talking about sex feels pretty risky. It also feels pretty like not allowed for a lot of people. I mean, culturally, I've talked about this a lot, that we live in a really sex negative culture. If you are here connected to me and you follow my content, then I'm going to presume that you have a fairly sex positive or at least sex open mindset. And if you follow people like me, and you exist in a world where you consume that kind of content, it might be easy to kind of lose sight of the fact that we actually still live in a very sex negative environment where talking about sex is still very taboo. I mean, you look at the way I even have to like spell sex on Instagram just to talk about my work and just to talk about basic healthcare. It is a clear message that this is still a bit wrong and a bit not allowed. I can also think of times in my own life when I was actively discouraged from talking about sex by my parents, including as a young adult, like well and truly old enough. In fact, as a young adult, I was engaged to my partner at the time, who I ended up marrying. I was with him for many years. We were clearly in a serious relationship, clearly committed to each other. And at the time, I remember being in my 20s and trying to talk to my mum about something happening between us sexually that actually was more just a funny story about his mum walking in on us, actually. And my mum, I'll never forget it. It's obviously a visceral memory in my body. My mum putting her hand up and saying, I don't want to hear this. And I just, even now, 20 years later, can remember that feeling in my body of like, oh, I got this wrong. Like we're close, but this is a no-go topic. Everything we're allowed to talk about, but not this. So I remember getting that message very clearly and carrying that through most of my life, frankly. So I add that in to the anxiety around the topic, the fact that we're not sure it's allowed. And then I add in the fact that it's a learned skill that most of us weren't taught. As I said, most of us were actively discouraged. And you've kind of got this perfect storm for why talking about sex in particular is so difficult. So, cultivating an environment to talk about sex is really important for a couple of reasons. Um, if sex is important to you in your relationship. Now, sex varies in terms of how important it is to people, but I just want to really validate here that you're allowed to really value sex and to really want to have a wonderful sexual connection with your partner and to have a wonderful, fulfilling sex life. You're allowed to want that. That's not frivolous or indulgent. It's actually a fundamental part of what makes us human. You're like, this is really normal to value this in your relationship. I certainly value it in my relationship. And you will have probably heard me say, because I'm very open about this, that my partner and I make a point of talking about sex in some way every single day. It's not a heavy sitting down, dissection of our sex life. It might just be expressing desire for each other, or attraction to each other, or flirting with each other, or reminiscing about something we've done, or touching each other in a flirty way. But we, in some way, exchange communication that is sexual every single day. And we made that choice early in our relationship to prioritize sex. Like we made that very intentional choice that this was going to be important to us. So, we've talked about some skills about communicating, and you can apply them to communicating about sex. But as I said before, communication about sex is important. One of the reasons that it is really important is that it helps to cultivate desire. Now, I mentioned before, sexual desire is a really big concern for people. In fact, it's the number one reason people seek sex therapy, issues of desire, particularly mismatched desire. So I want to talk a little here about desire. particularly if there is a mismatch in a relationship. Firstly, desire ebbs and flows. It's not a static thing. It's not I am a high desire or low desire person like forever. That's no, it changes through the course of our lives in response to a myriad of factors, physiological, lifestyle, stage of life, relational, hormonal. Like there's so many different reasons why our desire ebbs and flows and how we experience our desire changes. We now know that there is two types of desire. So spontaneous desire is just that, I'm going about my day and I have a horny thought or a sexual urge or feeling, and I'm like, damn, I can't wait to see my partner later and tear his clothes off, right? That is spontaneous desire. That is not how most people experience desire. We now know that the vast majority of desire experiences are experienced responsively, which means I might not walk around having that horny thought or feeling strike me out of thin air, but when I am doing the things that feel good, my desire shows up. That's why it's called responsive. Responsive desire shows up when it's got something to respond to. And we know that 75% of the time for women, their desire is experienced responsively. 75% of the time. And in fact, for men, it's nearly half the time. It's 45% of the time. So it's actually incredibly common and normal for you to be not fussed about sex day to day. And then you start doing the things that you know your body likes and finds pleasurable. And that's when your desire shows up. A really nice way to explain responsive desire and think about responsive desire is to imagine it's like the gym, right? I never feel like going to the gym in that I don't kind of have an urge to. I don't wake up and like, yeah, like that biological urge, right? It doesn't strike me, but I go, I do the things, I get dressed, put my shoes on, I pick a playlist or a podcast, I get on the treadmill or whatever I'm doing. And about halfway in, I'm like, yeah, like my energy's good. I'm up and about. I'm feeling strong. My muscles are working. My body's engaged. And I love it. And it feels great. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do this again. That is like responsive desire. So it is really important to keep this in mind when we're talking about issues of desire and mismatched desire, because the vast majority of desire issues that present to therapy or for healthcare are not issues of a desire problem, they're a sex problem. And what I mean by that is if desire is going to show up when it's got something to respond to, maybe the problem is the desire doesn't have something really pleasurable to show up for. And that's why so many of us now are banging on about the importance of pleasure, the importance of being able to take, seek pleasure, to express what we want, to ask for what we want, and to cultivate a context of pleasure in your relationship. If you are in a relationship, cultivating a context of pleasure is a team sport. So traditionally, mismatched desire had been approached through the very harmful lens of we just need to fix desire levels, right? And there's a lot of pressure, I'm going to say on both parties, right? The higher desire partner might feel frustrated, but they might also feel rejected and hurt. And then maybe they feel guilty for putting pressure on. And there's a whole bunch of things that goes with being a higher desire partner. The lower desire partner often feels frustrated too and guilty as well, and feels a lot of pressure to perform more sex, right? There's a lot that goes into both of those experiences not being a very good time, right? And these traditional treatment models that would treat desire as the desire is the problem to solve. Let's level out these desires. Like it's harmful. This focus of pleasure, of cultivating a pleasure context that desire can show up for, gives us a lot more room to move and explore. So one of the questions I actually got sent ahead of this webinar was about mismatched desire. And this would be what I would want people to take away from this particular section is to reframe the issue as this is not a desire discrepancy issue or a high or low desire issue. This is about pleasure. And this is about how do the two of us, or however many people in the relationship, how do we cultivate a context of pleasure that increases the likelihood that desire is going to show up, that we've given it something to show up for. If I could leave you with one practical thing about uh, issues of desire, of wanting sex more, it would be to tune into what your body enjoys on its own, engage with your senses, and start from there. A very simple pleasure exercise is to think about your five senses: smell, touch, taste, sight, sound, and think about what does my body really like when it comes to each of those senses. That's a beautiful place to start to understand our pleasure. Now, there was another question I got here around bringing up something I want to try in the bedroom. And maybe my partner is uncomfortable. And this person also mentioned being worried about like rejection, being shut down. Like, as I mentioned earlier, what does it mean for the relationship if I bring something up and I want to try something and my partner doesn't? What does that mean? So I wanted to give you a couple of very practical strategies to bring up desires, particularly if this is something you're feeling kind of embarrassed about or you're concerned about your partner's reaction. So I'm going to give you some really practical stuff here. First one is curiosity is key here, right? Lots of questions. And this involves openness and questions from both people, right? That first conversation is, we're going to work with an example, actually. Examples are helpful. Let's imagine I want to bring up the idea of a threesome with my partner, right? The thought of sitting down and saying to my partner, I'd like to have a threesome. Can we do that? That is, I'm going to say, an unhelpful frame for several reasons. It creates a lot of pressure. It also isn't very expansive to frame a conversation like that. It doesn't open things up for curiosity or questions or exploration. It's kind of like I've posed a question and now the only option is a yes or a no. Which brings me to my next point. Bringing up a desire and putting your partner in the position of having to say yes or no straight away is not a really helpful strategy. I think you're more likely actually to get a no, because if I'm under pressure and I'm like, oh God, do I want this? Yes or no? Oh, it feels scary. If you need an answer right now, then no. Really lovely to bring this up as a exploration, an explorative discussion rather than I need this, can we do this? Yes or no. A really good way to do this, a really practical way to do this, is to use external resources. And the second, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, the second practical thing to do here is to frame the discussion so that you don't need a yes or no and you make that clear. So you're bringing it up with your partner as like, I think it would be cool to talk about this more. Like, let's just kind of explore things more. Using external resources is so helpful because it creates some distance from the topic in a really good way. And it makes the conversation more of a exploration rather than a confession. So an example of this would be if I'm watching a TV show and there's a threesome on there, and I can say to my partner, oh, like, what do you think? That looks kind of hot. What do you think? Have you ever had a threesome? Have you thought about it? Like, it would make me kind of nervous, but I kind of think it looks hot as well. What do you think? These are some really lovely explorative ways to bring up the topic, even if your partner says, no, it's not for me, right? Not for me. Oh, like, why? Have you ever, like, did you ever kind of rule it out, or have you just never thought about it? And has anyone ever wanted to have one with you before? And like, there's still room to move even if the initial response is like, no, this isn't for me, right? It's a lot more expansive than if I say to my partner, I would like to have a threesome, and my partner says no. You've put them under pressure, and I think they're going to be resistant to further curiosity there. So using external resources is key. So this can be like watching a show, listening to a podcast, sharing an article or a blog, but you can also gamify it. Games are fun. And there's lots of great games out there for this kind of thing. So there's some wonderful card decks, question cards. One of my favorites, actually, that my partner have used is from a wonderful website. I think it's a website called We Are Not Really Strangers. And they have a range of card games, and some of them are for friends, some of them are for couples and relationship building, and some of them are spicy. So they have a few different card decks, and they have great questions and prompts and activities. The other thing I adore is a yes, no, maybe list. Now, a yes, no, maybe list is a list of activities, sex and sex adjacent, and you and your partner have the opportunity to say, you fill it out separately, and then you come together and compare yours, and you have the opportunity to go through the list and you will tick yes if it's a yes, I would love to keep doing this, or I would love to try this. You say no if it's a hard no for now, and you say maybe if it's like maybe under the right circumstances, or I need more information. But yeah, I'd be open to exploring this. That's a yes, no, maybe list. You fill it out separately, and then you come together and you work through the sheet together and identify where there's commonalities, ask questions, that kind of thing. I won't get into that anymore here because I have a wonderful yes, no, maybe list available for sale on my website. And as my Unbound members, you obviously get a big discount on my website. My yes, no, maybe list, I'm going to just take a moment to shamelessly brag here. It's the best I've seen. There's a lot of yes, no, maybe lists around the place. I've seen plenty on the internet. Mine is the best I've seen. It's very comprehensive. It's in sections. It's very expansive. It's got nearly 300 items on it. It creates a lot of conversation and exploration. Now, the reason I mention a yes, no, maybe list here is because we talked before about creating safety in conversation. If I say to my partner, here's this thing I've wanted to try, it's very direct, can feel a bit confronting. But if the worksheet is asking, if it's the yes, no, maybe list asking, then I'm answering the sheet. I'm not really answering my partner. So maybe there's something I've really always wanted to try and I don't know how to bring it up with my partner. Maybe it is a threesome. And I don't know how to say that to my partner, but on the yes, no, maybe list, I tick yes to threesome. So that when my partner goes, oh, you'd like to have a threesome, I get to go, yeah, like when I saw it on the sheet, I was like, yeah, that sounds hot. It's a really nice way to just turn the heat down on a topic that feels so scary for so many people, which I really understand. So there are a couple of practical strategies for bringing up something new that we want to try. Oh, actually, I want to give you one more. One more. I'm going to stick with the threesome example. We don't have to go from wanting to try something new to doing the thing. There is lots of room to move in between. So if I stick with the threesome example, if I go from two people in a monogamous relationship who maybe one or both of them wants to try a threesome, but they're pretty nervous, right? It feels pretty scary to imagine like bringing a third person in. I get them to explore it before they get to here. You explore it through dirty talk, through pornography, through fantasy, through play, like through maybe watching one. Like there's lots of ways you can go, you can move in between. You don't have to go from I want this thing to now we're doing this thing. So being creative about how we explore desires and fantasies is another great tip. Now, the final question I had that I want to share was about dry spells, like where there's been like a sexual disconnect for a period of time, and it can feel really like we're so far apart. The thought of being sexual together feels like I just can't even sort of remember how. I had a couple of really practical points I wanted to make here about reconnecting after a dry spell. First is acknowledge and reset, like just straight out, without blame, just acknowledging the disconnect. Like, I know we haven't been doing this for a while, or we haven't engaged sexually in a while, and I miss you and I miss that part of our relationship. So, what do you think? Do you miss it too? And I'd like us to start doing like small things just to reconnect. My second practical tip is if you haven't had sex in a while, any kind of sexual activity, take some sex acts off the table. Just remove the pressure just for a while, just for a while. So if you've had that initial reset conversation, like we would like to kind of take some steps towards rebuilding sexually, agree with each other that you won't engage in any, I don't know, let's say penetrative sex or oral sex or genital touch at all for, I don't know, whatever it is, a week, a month, whatever you like, right? The reason this is really helpful is it takes the pressure off, particularly if touch has been is unfamiliar, if it's been kind of not really happening, particularly if there's fear that it's going to lead to pressure that is, sorry, going to lead to sex that is a pressure or is unwanted. So if we say to a couple, take penetrative sex off the table for 30 days, then both partners know that if we reach for each other, if we touch, if we flirt, if we initiate intimacy, that we're not going to go to that. And that really reduces some pressure. My next step is to start small, really small. So that could be having a bath or a shower together. It could be cuddling. It could be holding hands. It could be touch in public. It's definitely going to include non-sexual touch. It could be lingering on a hug. So hugging, but hugging for that extra second, lingering on a kiss. Start small. My next tip is to rebuild some emotional intimacy through some really simple practical exercises, a little bit more eye contact. One of my favorite practical exercises to give couples after a period of disconnect is a simple appreciation expression at the end of each day. End of each day, looking at each other in the eye and expressing what we've appreciated about our partner that day. I really appreciated when you um, played with my hair while we were sitting on the couch. I really appreciated how you put your hand on my waist. I appreciated you taking the mental load of dinner planning. Whatever it is, I really appreciated seeing you passionate about, cleaning the shed. Like, I know that that makes you feel really kind of satisfied. And I just really appreciated seeing that part of you come to life. Appreciation, right? Build up. My final tip is to create novelty in your relationship outside of sex. I'm not talking about sex here. Novelty ignites aliveness in us and attraction and newness. So it's really key for couples who've been disconnected in any kind of way to make sure they are having new adventures together, new memories, new neural pathways forming. So I would definitely advise people who have been disconnected sexually to go and do a new hobby together, start a new class, go and take a surfing lesson, try a new restaurant, do a cooking class, whatever it is. Learn something new together, have a new experience together, go somewhere new together. The novelty is very connective. So we've covered a bit today, covered a lot about great communication, safety in communication, cultivating safety in your relationship, sexual communication. And then we talked there a little bit about desire and mismatched desire and also reconnecting after a bit of a dry spell. So we've covered a few different things today. I hope this has been helpful. You are welcome to watch this anytime. I would love to know what you think and what else you would like me to cover here. So don't hesitate to reach out, message me on Instagram, email me, phone me, whatever kind of works for you. I am right here, and I love connecting with all of you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye for now.